Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked, locked. Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being with us today. Jason, thank you for engineering the broadcast at GCN in Minnesota. Today we're going to be talking with Guineith Isaacs. She's live in Australia, staying up half the night to be with us to share her expertise in living off-grid, doing it the hard way, but I think the best way, especially if you believe, as we do, that we are going to see supply chain disruptions, power disruptions, disruptions in every way you can think of, and for those who want to be away from the marauders who take over the cities, when this happens, you'll be better prepared if you pay attention to Guineith Isaacs. Guineith, welcome.
Hello, Vincent. How are you this morning?
I am well. I'm well, and thanks for staying up late. So
that's all right.
Yeah. So what's happening in the world of Guineith Isaacs that you'd like to share with us today?
Okay, what I would like to talk about today is, there's a lot of talk out there in the universe, if you're inclined to listen to the mainstream media, about how this world is too small for us all to live in. There's too few resources, and so we all need to, just live in these big cities, and we need to have centralized control of our electricity, our water supply, our sewage treatment, our food, and just about everything else that is necessary for life. And, something, as life goes on, I can see that's actually not the right approach. What I can see, I have traveled from one end of this continent to the other, and it's a really, really, really big continent, and it's really, really empty. And it's true that a lot of the land here in Australia is pretty harsh, but to be fair, it's probably no more desertified. I don't know if that's even a word. It's probably no more arid than somewhere like Nevada or Utah or New Mexico. And these are places in the U.S. That actually have quite big populations, and yet they manage to, live in these sorts of places. And they actually, the people, they have large rural populations, actually. They might be very scattered rural populations, but, there's a lot of people who live out in the never, out in the middle of the Arizona desert and in New Mexico and in places like this. Does that make sense, Vincent?
Oh, absolutely. When you talk about Nevada, you think of Las Vegas, and they've got the lights blinking and flashing, and they have to import everything. Everything. It's in the middle of nowhere, or it was, okay? It's not the ideal location for a city. You know, you need for a city. You need.
It's a stupid place for a city. Truth be told.
Right.
It really is.
And you know, my apologies to those who live in Phoenix, Arizona. You know, back in the 1950s, if someone had asthma, a medical doctor would say, "Okay, well, you need to move to Arizona. It's dry, and it's a great place for those who have respiratory diseases because there's less mold, less pollen, you know, less humidity. Just a great place to go." Well, what happened since the 1950s is people took that advice and they moved, let's say, from the East Coast, where they had a green lawn, and they went to Arizona and they saw that their front yard was, you know, nothing but dust. So they started importing some soil, and they started fortifying the soil with NPK, fertilizer, planting seeds, watering it, and now they've got plenty of humidity because people want their front yards and their backyards to look the way they looked when they lived on the East Coast. And then if you fly over Arizona, and I have many years ago, I couldn't believe it. I was in an airplane and we were flying over Phoenix, and I was looking down. I couldn't believe it, how big it is, how expansive it is. And my thoughts were, where are they getting all the water to run this expansive desert city? Second question, what happens when they flush the toilets with all the water that they're getting? Where does that go?
That's the truth of it.
It is.
And the truth of it is, in places like Phoenix, they don't have a massive open watercourse that they can dump the sewage into so that the guys, downstream can deal with it. They actually reprocess their sewage water back into drinking water. So that's, if you are on the mains water supply in somewhere like Phoenix, you might want to take that into account, and you might want to consider going off grid for that reason. But what I'm getting at is that they built these cities in these sorts of places, okay? And people move there, and it's actually the grid is fragile. It breaks, and it's subject to political manipulation, and it has maintenance problems, and there's people skimming off the top of the maintenance budget so that somehow the money never quite gets to the technicians who have to go out and fix the phone lines, fix the water lines, fix the electrical wiring, the high-tension wiring for the electrical supply. And it all starts to fall apart. But, and then you end up having social problems, okay? But it is possible for people to live there. I would say that longer term, if Phoenix could, actually if somewhere like Phoenix, we're using Phoenix as an example, but if somewhere like Phoenix could get most of their households to where they put in 10,000 gallons of water tanks on each property, okay? And you can fit 10,000-gallon capacity of tanks. That's two 5,000-gallon tanks. You can fit them in the average suburban driveway, okay? And you'll still have room for at least one car in your driveway. So it's not impossible. And, you can cover your whole roof in solar panels. You can set up a battery. In fact, there's so many households in Australia connecting solar panels on a grid connect system that is actually causing problems for the grid. And it's actually threatening to send the electrical grid into something of a death spiral because there's so much current going into the grid. The grid is aging and it can't handle it in the middle of the day. It's possible to do that. If they could do that, and if they could deal with this social problem that seems to infest the United States of me first, okay, then probably that'd be okay. Because once you have a water supply, once you are no longer flushing your drinking water down the toilet, once you're actually learning how to compost your own manure and putting it into your yard to fertilize fruit trees, okay, and using your grey water to water those fruit trees so that you get a shade canopy going, then you, as a human, stop being an infestation on this planet and you start actually beginning to heal the earth with your very presence. Okay? I don't mean to sound like Bill Gates there, by the way. But if you look at Phoenix and you look at Reno and you look at Las Vegas and you look at Los Angeles, I don't know if it's becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy or what, but it's like looking at a cancer wound. You know, does that make sense? Can you understand that?
Well,
I don't want to see people as an infection. I want to see them as being useful.
Mm-hmm. Let me make a comment on what you just said. Several years ago, I was reading a story about this owner of an automotive dealership, and he built a new dealership. And when he was building it, he decided that he's got these steel roofs on his automotive repair shop, part of the business, the showroom, and he hooked it up such that the smooth roofs would divert the rainwater into the gutters, and then he would channel that rainwater through pipes into underground tanks, which he had buried in his parking lot. So these are water tanks. And the plan was that water is so scarce, so valuable, so expensive, that he could use his own rainwater to wash the cars that are on his dealership lot, make them look nice for the customers. Well, the municipality and city came down on him and fined him for collecting his own water. Can you imagine that? I'll tell you the rest of the story. I got involved in this. I'll tell you when we come back. So, the story that I'm talking about was in Utah. And there's a Toyota dealership called Salt Lake City Toyota. And the owner's name is Mark Miller. And he received a letter of violation from the municipality or the town where his dealership is because he had installed rain collection tanks. And the plan was to use rainwater that fell off his roof. He gathered it, diverted it into these tanks rather than have it run across his parking lot and wherever water goes downhill. He decided that he would use his own water to wash the cars instead of using chlorinated and fluoridated water, right?
Which is actually corrosive, by the way.
Yes, it makes no sense.
It's not good for cars.
Right. So he decided to use his own water, and that's what got him in hot water with the government. And they came down on him, and they were fining him and threatening him. And I called him up, and I said, I know what's happening. I read about it. Let's go get them. Let's go after these thugs. Let's go after these parasites. This is your water. And you spent all this money to build this system in order to use your water on your property for washing your cars. I don't get the problem. And he told me, he said, well, look, we reached a compromise. And it's not going to be so bad. It's not like they said, okay, Mr. Miller, this is your water. We're going to leave. He had to compromise with him. He had to give in. And I don't know all the details because he didn't tell me. But he didn't want to stand up and fight the way I would have if I were him. So that's one story. Let me tell you another story. Here, just outside of our farm, there's several towns surrounding us, 20, 30 miles away. And in one of those towns, there's a veterinary clinic. They work on large animals and small animals. You might even say it's a hospital for animals. Well, when they work on cows, they have this very sophisticated system. If a farmer's got a cow that's sick and he can get the cow into a trailer, he'll back the trailer into this corral-type system that's under roof, and you can walk the cow into an area where there's like a head gate, which will hold the cow while you work on him. But it also has a squeeze chute. Now, a squeeze chute actually it's a series of pipes that curve to the outside dimensions of a cow, and it will immobilize the cow so that the cow can't run, and you can give them an injection. You can do whatever you have to work on the cow. And literally, it can pick up the cow and tilt it if it needs to be tilted to work on the cow. Not to kill the cow, but to heal the cow, to treat the cow. Well, when this happens, cow poop comes out, urine comes out, and what they would do is they had a drainage system, sloped floors with these gutters built into the concrete of the floor, and they would hose it off every day. Makes sense, right? Kind of like cleaning up the operating room for a hospital. They'd hose it off, and the water went into an approved system that the state approved of, which is called a lagoon. And a lagoon is nothing more than a scooped out area, we call it a pond, a big pond, and the sun disinfects whatever goes into the lagoon. So the number one accepted, preferred, advocated system for treating sewage in Missouri is a lagoon. That's higher than an underground septic system. They like it better. I'm talking about the Department of Environmental Quality type people, those guys. The Department of Natural Resources, those guys. They like it better. Well, the municipality where this veterinary clinic is brought in water, and they said, okay, we want you to use our water. As a matter of fact, you better use our water, or we're going to fine you. And that's it for the lagoon. Yeah, we said it was okay at one time, but we changed our mind. Can't use it anymore. And if you don't use our wastewater treatment system, we're going to fine you every day that you don't use it. That's what happened. And I said, well, let's go get them. I said, well, we don't want that fight. We're not going to do it. We're going to hook up to their system. Can you imagine that? We'll be right back. Guineith Isaacs is with us. So, Guineith, here in our neck of the woods in Missouri, they have what's called a fire protection district. And that would be like the volunteer fire department. And they hold a gun to your head and they say, well, if you want to be a member, that's great. It's $50 a year. Oh, no, it's $80 a year because we raised the rates. And you can be a member, and if there's a fire, we'll come out and do our best to put it out. And we call those guys foundation savers. And the reason we call them foundation savers is because by the time they're done trying to put the fire out, the only thing that's left is the foundation. Well, if
sorry for laughing, but I know what you mean.
Well, it's true. So, what they do is,
if you don't pay the $80 and you have a forest fire on your place, they won't come and put it out.
Well, they will, but they'll charge you. They will, but they'll charge you an enormous amount of money. I'm talking $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. Well, and it's a business. It used to be a bunch of guys and gals would get together and volunteer, but now it's become a business, and they figured out that they can get away with it. Well, when they go to put out a fire, they have to get the water from somewhere. And if you have water close to your buildings, your insurance, I'm talking about your farm policy or your homeowner's insurance, will be less because they know that there's water close by and they don't have to go, 50 miles away to get water to bring it to refill the tankers to put the fire out. So a bunch of us farmers have ponds on our farms. Well, and the government, the corporation, when it was a little nicer and kinder and a little more gentle, would encourage farmers to have ponds on their farms. And actually what they did was they would pay 90% of the cost of putting in a pond, 75% of the cost of putting in a pond, because they wanted you to have water on your farm for a whole bunch of reasons. One of them being to put out fires before they become huge fires and take down lots of area. Well, they don't do that anymore. As a matter of fact, during the dark years of the Barry Soetoro administration, if you altered the course of water, the federal government could come down on you in a big way. Well, now that we have Donald Trump in, my understanding is that you can use your own water unless the states decide that you can't. So I'm particularly concerned about this, and I don't care what anybody says. If it lands on my property, it's mine. That's how I feel about that. I'm talking about water. And, I want the water to run onto our grass. I want the water to run on our property because it's something that has evolved over millennia. The grass counts on it. And the water that runs on our roof, we have these pipes attached to the downspouts to send the water away from the house proper so we don't flood the basement, for example, if we had a basement. And we send it onto the grass. It's just the way we think it should be done, away from the foundation so it doesn't settle and crack, when we do have these nonstop rains like we've had for the last month. And that was something else I wanted to mention, Guineith. We didn't talk about this, but we have been, the first part of the summer, nothing but drought. Dry, and we only got 25% of the hay crop that we would normally get, 1/4 of what we normally would get. Now, it has rained so much that the grass grew, but we can't cut it because it's still soaking wet, and it has been for weeks and weeks and weeks. So if we cut it, it'll just get moldy. Well, here's what I'm saying. For those farmers who are in the same jam as we're in, they're not going to have enough grass for the winter. They're going to have to sell more cows. So farmers' plight is not enough rain, too much rain, and we're in the middle of that right now. First, not enough. Now, too much. So I think that the herds are going to be thinned out because how are we going to keep a herd of cows without winter feed? How are we going to do it? It's an impossibility, especially when the price of hay is about $100 a roll. $100 for, a 1,000-pound roll. Used to be $30 to $35. Now it's 3 times as much. And farmers are starving to begin with. So what's happening across the United States is small farmers like us are going away. The small farmers are going away. The farmers are getting older because young people are saying, have you lost your mind? You want me to be a farmer? No way. It's too hard, too heavy, too dangerous, too risky, no reward. Why would anybody in their right mind want to be a farmer, right? So we're losing farmers. The average age of the farmer is getting older. And, as you get older, everything's heavier, believe me. Everything's heavier than it used to be. 50 pounds, 100 pounds is heavier than it used to be 5 years ago. I mean, I can prove that. Well, that's the way it is. And I don't think there's much good news in sight in that respect. Do you see the same thing happening in Australia?
Well, what I can see around here, in Australia as a whole, the statistics say that the farmers are getting older and the young people are not wanting to, take up the family farm. Around here, it's a bit of a mixed bag because some of the younger generation are taking up the family farm and some of them are not. Most of the farmers that I know around here, I would say they're over the age of 60, most of them. There are, like I say, it's probably around about 50% of them have handed their farm on to the younger generation, but the other 50%, there's either nobody to hand it on to or the kids are simply not interested. Okay? And that goes for every size of farm, right from, like 20, 30, 50 acre small holdings, right up to what we call them here stations. In the US, they'd probably call them cattle ranches or sheep ranches of thousands and thousands and thousands of acres. And so it is definitely a really, really big problem. But what we need to do, they are operating an extortion racket, plain and simple. And if anybody out there is in the situation where the local extortion racket is coming in and trying to say, that you must do this, that, or the other thing, you need to dig your heels in. You need to call them what they are. You need to call them an antitrust racketeering scam, because that's all they are. And they're not even maintaining their infrastructure properly. Everywhere across the country, their infrastructure is falling apart at the seams. You got lead in the water in Flint, Michigan. Okay, you've got the foundations of buildings in New York City sinking into the mud in Manhattan. Did you know that, Vincent?
Yes, and
the foundations of buildings in Manhattan are cracking.
Well, Manhattan's at sea level. 3-foot rise of water, Manhattan, you'll be opening the doors to buildings and walking in a wet
You'll be
carpet.
in Venice.
Yeah, you'll be in Venice. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely right.
That's just how it is.
And if you look at bridges, if you look under the bridges, you'll see that they are rusting, they're rotting, the concrete is crumbling. I mean, you can see it everywhere you go. Absolutely correct.
And it's only a matter of time before these bridges fall in, because how many 18-wheelers can these rusting, decaying, rotting concrete cancer bridges take before the angels that are holding the whole thing up decide that they've had enough and it's time for them to go home now? Especially the degradation that's in these cities. And like I say, probably if everybody in the city went off grid, the municipality would go broke. They absolutely would. But it would actually be a good thing. All those nutrients, all that water that is being generated on that land, instead of going and toxifying the local bay, it would stay on site and it would fertilize the fruit trees and it would fertilize, all of these things. And, the water, the grey water from the washing machine, the bath, the shower, the kitchen sink, if you could set up a system where, it's piped out to irrigate those fruit trees, then you would have a green oasis in that suburban backyard. And I have actually done this in a suburban backyard. And in the middle of summer, in my suburban backyard, when I was living in Geraldton, Western Australia, I would go up and I would sit on my shed roof and I would look at my backyard, and my backyard would be so green and so lovely and so lush. And I would look at everybody else's backyards, and they would be dry and they would be barren. Once again, Geraldton is a semi-arid climate. And, I would actually feel pretty good about myself. And I had a fruit tree, and it was growing over the top. I wouldn't in hindsight, I wouldn't necessarily recommend other people doing this, because it can cause problems with the septic system. But I planted a fruit tree over the soak well of the septic system.
And loved
that fruit tree in 1 year grew to being a full-size fruit tree with fruit on it.
There you go. It loved it. We'll be right back.
From a 1 meter cane.
So, Guineith, you mentioned that the average age for a farmer in Australia is about 60 years old. That's about the same thing here in the United States. In the last 30 years, the average age of a farmer was 50 and a half years old. Today, it's 58.3 years old, so it's darn close to 60. And I'm a little older than that. I'm 66. And according to the USDA, there's a 2012 census of agriculture, and they say that the average American farm is 434 acres. Ours is about half that size. And they say that the percentage of farmers in the United States as of 2008 is less than 2% of the population. So 2% of us are providing food for 98% of us. Interesting. Or 100% actually. So there's only 2% of us as farmers. And the average small family farm in the United States is believed to be 231 acres. So our farm is just 10 acres larger than the average small family farm. Ours is about 241. And how much do farmers make per acre in the United States? Well, in 2013, they made about $300 an acre. And what are the what are the states that have the most farms? Number one is Texas. Number two is Missouri. And Iowa would be number two, both probably close for a time, Missouri and Iowa. And following Texas, Missouri, and Iowa are Oklahoma, California, Kentucky, Ohio, Minnesota, and Illinois. So believe it or not, the number two state for farms is Missouri. Now the question is, how many acres do you need to have for a small farm? Well, according to what I'm reading on the internet, if you're going to have a homestead with 1 or 2 horses, a family cow, and some gardens, you need about 10 acres of pasture, 2 acres for produce, and so they're saying, with the buildings and your home, you need about 15 acres. I think that would be the absolute minimum. What do you think, Guineith? How many acres do you think, on average, you would need to have to be somewhat self-sufficient?
In Australia, the average soil and the average landscape is, we don't have such good soil as what you do in the US on average on our continent. I would say that the average, I would say probably that the minimum sustainable farm size in Australia around here would be 20 acres. Okay? And that is assuming that your almost your entire farm is covered in forest, because most of that 20 acres will be composed of woodlot, okay, and perhaps with an understory, and that is to burn for firewood to keep you warm in the winter, because people think that an arid climate never gets cold or a semi-arid climate never gets cold. They are very, very much mistaken. It gets really, really cold here. Although it doesn't snow, it gets frosty during the winter here. And we might go a month or 2 months or 3 months where the average daytime temperature does not go much over 10 degrees Celsius. So that's the daytime temperature, and it'll be 10, 12, 13, and then back down to 10, 9, 8. You know, that's the sort of cycle that it runs on. We're heading into the top of the hour, aren't we? I'd like to discuss this some more in the next hour, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely. And class, 10 degrees Celsius is about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. We'll be right back. We're going to talk about fighting back and keeping your water and keeping the parasites away from. Everyone all set? Cocked, locked, hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Guineith Isaacs is with us live in Australia. If you'd like to contact Guineith, get more information about her, you can go to usaprepares.com, usaprepares.com, and click on the instructors tab, and you'll find her. There'll be a link, several links to Guineith Isaacs. And just as a note, we're working on having a get-together with Mike Ma in Springfield, Missouri on the 26th of October. It'll be about 4 hours. It'll be dinner. It'll be absolutely insightful. You'll learn things that you didn't even know about. You didn't even know you could learn these things. And there's only one guy. There's only one Mike Ma. Just literally, there's only one Mike Ma. And I think there are going to be fewer and fewer of these opportunities. I'm looking forward to it if we have enough people who are interested. So if you are, that would be the 26th on a Friday at a restaurant to be determined. Dinner's included, $50. Mike Ma gets the proceeds for this to cover his expenses to come. We're looking for between 10 and 25 people. We don't have that many yet. I can't believe it, but we don't. And if you're interested, send me an email, Vincent@usaprepares.com or instructor@usaprepares.com. And I'll need your phone number. I'll call you and give you the particulars. It's invitation only. That doesn't mean you're not invited. You are invited. But we want to keep this a private meeting, and we'll do it by invitation only. So you contact me, and you'll be on the list. I'll call you, let you know exactly where it's going to be, and we look forward to seeing you. So Vincent at USA Prepares, instructor at USA Prepares, and we'll get back to you. But I do need your name and number. And it's just for me. Just for me. Okay? We're not sending your names and phone numbers to the other team. We don't even like the other team. So that's one thought. And one other thing I wanted to mention, we've been talking about farming. And so do farmers need to have a degree? And some people think of farmers as a bunch of bumpkins, right? Well, I can tell you that Guineith Isaacs has a degree, and she's a farmer. Our son has a degree, and he's a farmer. And I have one, and I'm a farmer. So is it necessary? No, but, learning about chemistry.
It depends on what your degree is in.
Yeah.
I would say.
Right. Yeah. Chemistry, physics, biology, they're all important. And, you need to study them. You don't have to study them at the university, but you need to know about biology. You need to know about chemistry. You need to know about electricity. You need to know about physics. You need to know a lot, auto mechanics. You need to know a lot about a lot of stuff to be a farmer. It's different from sitting behind a keyboard and making appointments for people, at the doctor's office. It's different from that. Way different. So I just wanted to share that. Guineith?
Yeah. Yeah, I actually have my degree. It's actually from Melbourne University, which is an Australian Ivy League university. So, my degree is in environmental science and geography. And since I have graduated, I've done a lot of private research on my own time into how Indigenous tribes use their land. Okay? And you'd be really, really surprised. There are agricultural systems that Indigenous tribes are still currently using in some parts of the world that are 3,000 and 4,000 years old. This is systems of drainage canals, irrigation, food transportation. I'm thinking especially in South America, and also, people think that Papua New Guinea is jungle tribes and that they're savages and that they've never had agriculture. That's absolutely not true. There are agricultural irrigation systems, massive ones, in Papua New Guinea that are anything up to 20,000 years old. And, people are absolutely astounded when they hear that. But these were entirely dug with hand tools, not even with shovels, with something like digging sticks and also stone adzes. So stone tools basically fastened onto the end of a stick, or sometimes just a stick. They're digging the soil out and piling it up to one side to create an irrigation trench, just a sharpened stick. If they can do it, then you can do it. And while it's true that the average farm generates $300 per acre in the United States, there are actually a lot of farms that are much smaller, that are in the ballpark of 1 to 20 or 50 acres, that are actually generating up to and a bit more than $100,000 an acre. And you might think, how on earth is that possible? But I assure
that's
you
easy.
That's true.
That's easy. That's poppies and marijuana.
No, actually. You know how they're doing it? They are intensively
expensive
growing organic vegetables.
Right. And herbs, yes. Mm-hmm. And mushrooms.
Herbs, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they're intensively growing organic vegetables and organic herbs. And this is how you do it, okay? You plant fruit trees and nut trees in the garden, and you have those so that they're established on irrigation lines. You have them growing between the garden beds, and depending on the climate that you're in, sometimes in the garden beds, but you'll have to think about this for your own particular situation. If you're in an arid climate or a semi-arid climate, you need to dig a trench on contour, okay? And you fill the bottom of the trench with wood chips, bark chips, or some such thing, and then a layer of manure. And then you use that trench as an irrigation system. And you have the ditches, the trenches on contour, going down the hill as a terrace. And then you plant your vegetable crops into the trench, okay? And then, like I said, depending on your climate, on the side of the trench, the dirt that you've dug out of the trench that you've piled on the downhill slope to make the edge of the terrace, on there you plant some manner of tree that is maybe a bit more suited to being in the dry, something like a carob tree, something like an olive tree, or something like that. You have to do your own research for trees that are like that are suited to your area. Maybe prickly pears if your trench is wide enough, because prickly pears can tend to, expand. But the thing is that they provide shelter to the vegetables that are growing in the trench. And they provide shade, and they, of course, feed off, as well as that, they feed off the moisture that's in the trench, and it helps their growth as well, and they feed off the nutrients that are in the trench, and it helps their growth as well. If you're in an arid climate or a semi-arid climate, you may have to find that you plant the trees periodically actually in the trench, okay? So you, like I say, you have to actually use your intelligence. You have to use your brain to be a farmer. People think that farmers are stupid. Actually, they're not. They're some of the cleverest people. And you look at how a forest is formed. You look at the canopy, and any forest grows in layers. And you can arrange it so that you have this sort of food forest growing in your backyard, or growing on your 1, 10, 20 acres of land, and to gradually turn the whole thing into a vast forest of food-bearing trees. And if you think how many nut trees, for instance, could you fit onto 1 acre of land? I haven't done that calculation, but I would imagine that it would be several dozen mature nut trees, each producing 500 kilograms of nuts per year. I'm talking about something like almonds, hazelnuts, or walnuts, okay? These trees grow to be quite large, and their nuts are very, very, they command a premium price, especially if the nuts have been raised in an organic fashion and have never, ever been sprayed. If you can do that, then you have got a very, very easy income, okay? Mm-hmm. And under the trees, you can plant your vegetables, you can plant your herbs, you can plant root crops underneath the fruit trees and underneath the nut trees. And they are shaded from the sun. And like I say, because they're in a trench system, it makes the whole process of irrigation much easier. Of course, you're still going to have to irrigate. You're going to have to send up a pondage system in order to provide the irrigation water before you put in any gardens at all. But it absolutely can be done. And you can generate up to $100,000 per acre of land if you set up your land in that way. And there are people doing it in the United States as we speak.
We'll be right back. The studio window. Here to an orchard we have in our farm, fruit trees. And as you were describing this, I've decided to take the rain runoff that we have from our barn, plumb it underground with 4-inch pipe to the orchard. And it's like 20 or so fruit trees that I've just gotten started. And I can take that rain drip, drip, drip from the overnight cooling of the air, the condensation of the air on the steel roof that's cooler, causes condensation. So at night we've got water droplets coming off the roof. I can collect that, send that several hundred feet to the orchard underground. And for maybe, if I buy used materials, we've got a backhoe, we can trench it. For a couple $100, we can have permanent irrigation for our fruit trees. Makes absolute sense to do that, don't you think?
Yes, I'm absolutely in agreement with that. I'm considering doing a similar method on my farm to create an avenue of, I'm thinking, nut trees along our driveway. There's a type of nut tree called a hazelnut tree. Okay, its nuts are very, very valuable as a health product, and I think that they're going to become more valuable as time goes on as a health food because they are a superfood for the brain. Okay, and they've been recognized as such among the Northern Europeans, the Scottish and the Irish and other Northern European peoples for thousands of years in their mythology and in their history. They are legendary for being a brain stimulant. But, people think that they can't grow here. Well, I've got news for them that I'm growing them here. They live for hundreds of years. They grow to be a large, shady tree, and they grow anywhere that you can grow oak trees. You can grow hazelnut trees because they need the same sort of soil conditions as oak trees. And at my son's former high school in the local village, they planted a grove of oak trees, and they irrigated them, they established them, and those oak trees are maybe now 30 feet high. So they're still babies yet. They wouldn't be more than about 30 years old, I would say, these oak trees, maybe 20 or 30 years old. Oak trees, when they are fully grown, they are well over, they would grow to be between 50 and 100 feet tall and probably around about the same width. And they live to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old. In Europe, there are oak trees, and in Britain, there are oak trees that are still growing that are at least 600 or 800 years old. And so they're magnificent. But what people don't know is that anywhere that you can grow oak trees, you can also grow hazelnut trees, and you can grow chestnut trees as well. And it's very common in Europe for the three trees to grow together in the same forest, as it's called a tree guild. So the three trees, they grow together, they have a relationship in the soil with each other. They help one another in the soil because, I don't know if any of your class have seen that movie Avatar, but at one point in the movie, one of the main characters mentions that the trees are talking to each other through their root systems. Well, actually, that's what happens with trees. They actually do communicate with each other in a forest through their root systems. And so I would love to plant a grove of nut trees here and to be able
that thought. Guineith, you mentioned planting a nut grove. And on our farm, we have black walnut trees growing. They're mature, they're very large, and they drop black walnuts on the ground. Lots of them. Probably, if we were able to collect them all, a pickup truck load every year of black walnuts.
Wow.
And we also planted chestnut trees. And I'm looking forward to that. That was something that was quite a delicacy when I was growing up in the 1950s and the 1960s. For Thanksgiving, we would have roasted chestnuts. And I thought, they're kind of hard to find here in Missouri. On the East Coast, you can find them. But we planted our own chestnut trees so we could have them as well. But I think it's important to do exactly what you're saying. Grow synergistically. Grow trees that like each other, that don't fight each other. Plant underneath the canopy. Absolutely, absolutely important. And when you plant a garden, one of the things that I've discovered, when we were growing up, when I was growing up in the 1960s, we had a garden, but we put it in the corner of the property. It was too far away. But right outside the back door, right outside the kitchen door, we had an herb garden. That was really convenient. So we could go right out in the herb garden, pick the herbs that we were going to have with that meal, fresh right then and there. But, walking to the distant corner of the property for tomatoes and watering and that kind of thing, it's too far. So my thinking is, if you're going to have a garden that you're going to actually use, you can intensively garden and have it really close to the back door, if that's a sunny area. That way you can water it, you can weed it, and you can get fresh produce, during the growing seasons every day. It makes a lot of sense to me. It really does. So that's what we do.
Well, actually, I do something quite similar at my place. I have a vegetable garden which grows against our house does not sit north, south, east, west. We have a north east facing wall. So remember, we're in the southern hemisphere. Mm-hmm. So it would be like having a southeast facing wall where you are. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, so anyway, that is quite a warm area. And so I tend to plant vegetables there. The idea was to plant vegetables there that like the heat during the winter to get them established, so that I have a bit longer growing season for things like, for instance, courgettes, tomatoes, and such like. But gradually what's happened is that I've been planting perennial vegetables in that place, such as globe artichokes and rhubarb in the garden beds. And these garden beds are made out of old fridges and old bathtubs with the holes plugged up and with drainage holes drilled about 2 inches below the soil surface, filled up to that point with, bark chips, and then the last few inches in well-rotted compost and manure. And that's how I do it. And the subsurface water keeps them going really, really well, so that I only have to water them at this time of year every couple of weeks. In the middle of summer, I would anticipate doing my garden watering there about once a week. But my other vegetable gardens, they are a little bit of a walk, maybe about 20 or 30 metres walk, but they are right next to the chicken pen. So I go and visit the chickens every single day to collect eggs, to feed them, to make sure they're okay, to talk to them, to watch them, to make sure, that all is well in the world of chook. And when I'm there, I go into my vegetable garden and I pull up weeds and I throw the edible weeds, things like grass, oats, barley, and such like, over the fence into the chicken pen, so that the chickens have fresh greens every day. And this is what I'm talking about with actually integrating the various aspects of your life. This is a key part of permaculture. Now, because chickens, you can't keep them too close to the house, because I have roosters and they crow. And sometimes they crow at 2 and 3 a.m. in the morning. I don't want them close to the house. So, but having the chickens and the vegetable patch, and the vegetable patch has got 6-foot-high fences all the way around it. And I train my chickens to not go into the vegetable patches. They don't go in there anymore. But this is it. This is what you need to do. You need to integrate your life And I grow, I have a walnut tree. My walnut tree is not as big as yours yet. My walnut tree is maybe about 18 inches tall. And I actually thought that I put it in a few years ago, and then we had a year or two of rather harsh weather, and I thought that walnut tree had died because it hadn't put out any shoots in a year or two. But I left the stump there, and I said, oh, well, I'm going to pull that up one day, etc. But I'm glad I didn't pull it up, because this year, for whatever reason, it's decided to put shoots out. And it's actually growing, and it's growing at a phenomenal rate. And so what I think has happened is it just spent those few years putting down a taproot. And then when it thought that its taproot had gotten down to a sufficient level, then it concentrated once again into producing a canopy. And this is it, just having the intelligence to recognize what's going on, and sometimes just to leave things be. You know, if you think that something's not working, especially in the area of trees, sometimes just wait a year or two to see if the tree actually begins to do something again. Because, you know, trees go through cycles. Sometimes they have bad years, and then you usually find that after it's gone through a season of slow growth, that it will double or triple its height, sometimes within a single season, you know. And but anyway, this is how I organize my own vegetable patch. And I've got 2 vegetable gardens and another one that's being planned. One of the vegetable gardens is mostly, once again, old fridges and old bathtubs in raised beds. And the other one, as a trench system, as a system of how I described earlier. You dig trenches and then you fill them mostly with bark chips. And one thing I do to help the soil hold its moisture, I put water. They're called water-saving crystals. Okay. I don't know if they sell those in hardware stores in the United States, but they certainly sell them in Australia. Would you like me to describe what I mean by water-saving crystals?
Sure, please do. Sure.
Okay. Water-saving crystals, there's a number of different kinds, okay? And the ones that I have actually are not the proper ones that you're supposed to use in a garden, but they work. They are a compound that are called polyacrylates, okay? And they are the same compounds, you know, the baby's nappies and the feminine hygiene products, and they're ultra thin. Mm-hmm. And then when they get moisture on them, then they fluff up and they retain the moisture. I think that we've all probably seen those. Well, how they work is they have a layer of polyacrylate crystals in them, and those absorb the moisture and they lock the moisture away. The other place that you see polyacrylate crystals is fake snow. I don't know if you've seen fake snow, Vincent.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, what that is polyacrylate crystals. And I've been experimenting this year with using polyacrylate crystals on the garden. And so far it's been a phenomenal success. They're non-toxic in the soil. The only thing I would say is that they can tend to make the water in your reservoir a bit slimy. And so people say, it's, that you can use it in dams. I'm not sure that I would just be adding it to dam water, although apparently you're supposed to be able to. But I would say in a confined irrigation system that it's going to be an excellent solution. And so far it's going great. The trial areas that I've been mixing the polyacrylate in with the compost has been working really well for water retention in the soil. But like I say, I'll keep you posted on that. But this is it. You've got to try new things. And if you've got a new idea or something that you want to experiment with, like, for instance, setting up one of these terrace trench systems, like, for instance, using polyacrylate systems, like, for instance, converting bathtubs and washing machines and, old fridges into gardens, don't feel that you have to do it all at once. Get one or two of them and give it a go. And then if it works, get a few more and do the same thing. And then it becomes, once you get good at it, it becomes a rinse and repeat cycle. Does that make sense?
Yes, and we are saving tires for those in the area who want to use them for their gardens. And so we've been stacking them up. And anybody who wants them...
That's another thing we do here, that tree guard.
Yep. Yeah, Guineith is with us, and we'll be right back. We're talking about farming, and I've got a question. Have you dewormed chickens? And if you have, what did you do? We'll be right back. So, Guineith, you raised chickens. Have you ever had to deworm chickens? And if you did, what did you do?
Okay. For whatever reason, we don't get very many problems with chicken worms here. The main parasite on chickens that we get here is something called stick-fast fleas. Okay. And those are small black fleas that tend to infest a chicken. They, especially along the comb and along the wattle, but if you look closely, they're actually all through the feathers. And I've found, there's all sorts of, cures that are recommended for stick-fast fleas, but I've found that there has only really been one thing that has worked for me, and you probably won't like this, Vincent, but this is the only thing that's worked for me for getting rid of stick-fast fleas, and that is a small, tiny, single drop of frontline on the comb, and you mustn't eat the eggs for 6 weeks afterwards. And if you do that to every chicken, you won't have any stick-fast fleas. The frontline will not hurt the chicken. You'll probably only have to do it once, and they will not come back. Mm-hmm. But stick-fast, if you don't treat them, they'll kill your chickens. They will kill them. They will get anemia, and they will die. But I've heard all sorts of remedies of putting grease and fat and all the rest of it, and I'm sure they work up to a point, but they can get reinfested so easily from the dust that they dust bath in. If you've got a bad infestation on your property and they free range, then it can be impossible. But if you put one drop of frontline on each chicken all at the same time, it won't just kill the fleas on the chicken. It'll kill the fleas in the whole environment, and you won't have any reinfestation problems. But like I say, do not eat the eggs for 6 weeks afterwards. You can feed them to your dogs, you can feed them to your cat, of course, but don't eat the eggs yourself. Okay. So that's a good use for frontline. And you don't have to do it every month. Like I say, you'll probably only have to do it once.
And where exactly do you put this one drop?
On the comb of the chicken.
Okay.
Probably on the top of the head, in between the eyes and at the top on the comb. That's on the fleshy bit that comes up the middle of the chicken's head. I've found that's
typically
the best
red.
place. Yeah, they're typically red.
Yeah, and I had a question for you about bugs. Over this summer, we have noticed that there's the absence of beetles, grasshoppers, flies, every kind of bug you can think of is in decline around here. Are you seeing the same thing?
I would say probably there's fewer mosquitoes than there would normally be at this time of year. But that could be that it's just been a drier year here. We are experiencing an El Nino. When you get an El Nino, you get a wetter and stormier than normal, summer. When we get an El Nino, we get a drier and hotter than normal winter where we are. So I'm not particularly noticing an absence of bugs. I would say probably that most of your bug problems in the U.S. are probably caused by your genetically modified grain crops, which is something that we don't have here in Australia. There's no genetically modified grain crops here in this country.
Are you saying
that's just my opinion.
Are you saying that the GMO and the glyphosate are killing the bugs? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but the glyphosate's a problem. But I would say that the glyphosate's definitely a problem, but I would say the GMO is even a bigger problem than that. And that's probably what's killing all your insects in the United States, which is a huge problem.
It is.